Today on Faith Matters, we are continuing our Someone You Should Know series. Chris Tornquist is going to be talking to Sam Haney. I'm Dan Jarms, and you're listening to Faith Matters, a podcast to help update you on matters of Faith Bible Church, as well as equip you in matters of the Christian faith.
Today, real privilege to have Sam Haney with me. Sam, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Well, boy, there's a lot to talk about. And I said to myself, the hardest part is trying to find time when you aren't doing something else, even to sit down for a few minutes. Because I know you're running here and there and all over the place. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes to do it. Well, let's start with some basic stuff. Tell me where you grew up. What was your family? Who was in your family? What was home life? Just do some biographical.
So I grew up in Enumclaw, Washington, just a small farming town on the western side of the state. And I grew up in, I did grow up in the church, and, we started out in a Presbyterian church, and a little bit later on, we ended up moving to a church called Mount Rainier Christian Center. And I can't remember exactly the denomination on that one. It's kind of a little bit more like a Foursquare church, kind of that sort of thing. So, there's some encouragement for speaking in tongues and all kinds of things like that. And we were really involved with church, and those are some of my earliest memories. But that
was all from childhood. That's where you were all throughout high school. Where'd you graduate from? What school?
Enumclaw High School. I went there for the first 3 years, and then my senior year, I actually moved to the Tri-Cities with my sister, and I wrapped up my senior year at South Ridge High School.
Okay, very good. After that, have you taken any classes beyond that?
I went to Whitworth University and graduated in 2017. And
good for you. What was your area of study?
International business.
Wow. And what were you hoping or still hope to use that education for? So
that was potentially to actually do international business between the U.S. and China. And that was strictly an option. I had grown up working in my family's business, and my dad had encouraged me to use that time to see if I was good at anything else, or see if maybe I was sure that I wanted to go into the family business. And so I said, okay, if I wasn't going to do this, I'm going to study international business. And so I studied it, and by the end of my senior year, I had learned a lot of really practical business stuff that I get to use now. However, I knew that I wasn't going to I was not going to go overseas.
Stuff,
I wasn't doing that.
No. Family, sisters, brothers?
I have two older sisters, a younger stepsister, and a younger brother.
Are they in this area? Do you see them?
I do see them fairly frequently, but they all live on the western side of the state now.
And mom and dad?
So mom lives in Enumclaw. Dad goes back and forth between Southern California and Lake Tapps area, Bonnie Lake. Yeah.
Because of business?
No, he's pretty much retired. He just snowbirds it.
Wow.
He gets a little cold, and he's like, all right, I'm out.
Tell me about when you moved to Spokane and what brought you here.
Basically, my parents had split, and at that time, there was just a lot of chaos, turmoil in the family. I ended up, through a bunch of different circumstances, moving with my sister to the Tri-Cities, and just no church for years. Kind of got plugged back in, and I started going to Young Life and attending that. And so when I was looking at college, I was looking for something that would do international business and a university that was plugged into Young Life, and Whitworth is very heavily tied into Young Life. There's a lot of people in the theology department that's very closely tied to it. So that brought me here, and then I've stuck around since.
How did you find Faith Bible Church?
The long story short of that is that I was doing research online, trying to find out if I could potentially go and take seminary classes through the Master's Seminary. And I was looking at online options, pricing, things like that. And I saw that there's actually an option for you to take online classes or on-site classes here in Spokane. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so I looked up where it was, and it turns out it was a church. And so I kind of was doing a little bit of research, and one Sunday when my best friend and his wife were skipping Sunday at their church, I was like, all right, I'm going to go check out that church. And I've been here ever since.
Have you taken some classes here at the seminary?
Not yet. I'm going to wrap up ACBC training first.
Okay.
Once that's all done, it costs a lot of money.
So
I have to save a little bit. But the plan is to take seminary classes. Yeah.
And money-wise, when you got to put things aside, you own a business, and that is interesting too. When you've got all business expenses, sometimes to put that money aside, I bet.
Yeah, the business is really seasonal. It's car washing, and so it's all based around the weather. And God's been extraordinarily gracious and provide much more than I could possibly need. But it's something where there's definitely a time for the harvest and a time where there's not much of a harvest, and so you have to save.
Well, it's a struggle, is it not?
Yeah.
But do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I love it. So the way I think about it is kind of like Paul with tent making. He always used tent making. There were times where financially he never wanted to be a burden on the church, and so he would turn to tent making to be able to provide the funds so that he could just continue to go about the business of just honoring Christ. And that was his goal. His goal was that the gospel would be spread, and that way with his body, he would honor Christ. And so for me, God has given me gifts, and he has a specific plan for how specific works that he wants me to do. And car washing is something that it's providing the means so that I can really be here at the church and I can just work for him.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, if we were to run down all the things you're involved in, we'd probably be here for another hour and a half as I see you doing all sorts of things in involvement with that one. But just as a list, what are the things that you're involved in? Maybe start with the one that's most precious to you, and we'll talk about some of the other things that the Lord has gotten you into as well. What's number one thing that excites you?
Yeah. Well, the number one thing that excites me actually isn't even an official ministry that I do. I usually make a lot of meals and just go bring them to random people, and we'll just fellowship together.
Wow.
And so the cool thing with the car washing is that it gives me a lot of freedom to be able to go home and to make these meals, and then I can just go and I can bring them to people. Sometimes just drop it off. Other times I can spend some time with them. But that's I do a lot of that. And then
okay, so I have to ask. Obviously, you're a cook, or are these TV dinners?
No, they're not TV dinners.
Okay, I knew that. But I was
usually I'll cook them. There have been a few times where I've committed to bringing food, and then the way the day shakes out, it's like, okay, I'm gonna pick up some Thai food for you or something like that. But just going and doing that's really sweet. And going down the list, official ministry, I'm a youth group leader. That's my main ministry. Going through ACBC training, so I'll be a counselor as well here at the church. And I also help out as a leader and teacher in a place to be. But the main ministries are going to be youth group and the ACBC counseling. So
I have to ask, are there times every day that you can actually sleep? Or is it, do you find some time to carve that out as well?
I do find time to sleep. I say that the last couple of days have not, but yeah, no, I don't know. God just has a funny way of working things out. He provides everything that I need for life and godliness.
Wow. What a wonderful testimony. Youth group, I think I know that you're involved even with doing some one-on-one or small group things with some of the high school guys. Am I seeing that correctly? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's encouraged for youth group leaders in general, but even before I was in the youth group ministry, I was already spending a ton of time with the youth group guys. Like that was just, I think that's part of the reason why talking to my mentors and some of the other very godly men around FBC, it was pretty obvious, like God's gifted you in that area. Like you're already very active in that area. You're using your gifts. And so just this is naturally it. So I meet with Sam Parker, Tucker Pearson, Eli Theory, Justin McEachran, and Levi Theory, and I do quite a bit of rock climbing. And they're really sweet guys. And I meet with a few other people that are outside of youth ministry as well, but those are kind of my main guys. So,
what do you do with those young men? What's your goal? What's your topics you deal with? What's your plan? What's your overall strategy with those?
Well, the goal should always be to point them towards glorifying God. And so just as we go through life, there's so many different situations that come up. It might be I'm getting my driver's license. Now all of a sudden I get this whole new freedom going around. And so just as they come in, I'm not a very wise person. I don't have a whole lot of wisdom on my own. However, God has this perfect wisdom that it's not cultural. It goes generation to generation. It's always true. And so if I can point them towards the wisdom that God has, and point them towards how, what's pleasing to God, to glorify God with situations like I have a driver's license now and suddenly I'm
very practical stuff.
What does that look like? And so, sometimes I might be meeting with Elijah Arbesnik and just talking about life with him and some of the things that maybe he's been wrestling with God about. And sometimes I got a passage of the Bible. Sometimes I got to search a little bit, but it's always trying to go to God with all of it. It's all for His glory.
Were the teenage years in your own life really important as far as spiritual maturity, spiritual decisions, a decision for Christ? Was that sort of reflection maybe why you're interested in these guys?
I was not a Christian through that time. I thought I was. Okay. And if you had talked to anybody from my childhood churches, they would have been like, oh yeah, no, he was doing the altar calls. Like he was waking up early and doing the 2-hour prayer meetings during winter camps, like with all the leaders, that kind of stuff. And so they would have said that. I never submitted to Christ. I never changed anything about my life. It was always God serving me, and there was no relationship. There was no relationship whatsoever. I became a Christian, 2.5, not quite 3 years ago. Wow. And for one reason or another, God has allotted me the measure of faith that He has. And I just have a heart for these guys. Like I don't know how else to describe it. They're just
you remember
great guys.
You remember the issues you had and struggles during that time, and now look back that maybe you thought you were a believer as a teenager and realize now that you really weren't. And now I can see your heart for these guys to say, hey guys, is this serious? Are you really got this connection? We've seen some baptisms with these guys who have made public professions now that I've come to Christ, and that's just got to be so thrilling for you to do that.
I get to call them brothers in Christ. And, I really liked Dan's sermon specifically today, where he's talking about how every member of the body, if one's hurting, we're all hurting. We're all suffering together. We're bearing each other's burden. If one of us is rejoicing, one of us gets baptized, it is awesome.
Yes.
It's truly the exact definition of awesome. And like Sam Parker, I'd seen his heart, and God's worked on his heart so much, and he's gone through tough situations. Eli Theory, same deal. Levi Theory, they all have these challenges, and God's just leading them through it. And I'm just really thankful for every single one of them.
Well, as you know, I've got an arrangement already to talk to Sam Parker and talk to him about his story. Recently baptized, and I want people to hear what's the Lord has been doing in his life. So I'm looking forward to that very, very much. What's the Lord doing in your life right now? What are you learning as you look back over the past 6 months, year, whatever time frame you say, look what he's teaching me? What would that be?
I would say the big lesson for the last 6 months has been contentment. And there's different levels of contentment. I think a lot of people think of contentment, they're like, oh, God's given you food on the table and he's given you a place to stay. Those things, those are great. Like being content with what the Lord has provided you is definitely part of that. But there's contentment with Christ, and that's a whole different level. And so last 6 months or so, there has been that battle of, is Christ sufficient? And are you like not just thinking that or knowing that, but is that really is that something that you truly understand, that you trust? Do you trust Christ in that way, that he is actually sufficient for life and godliness? And so that's been, I think, a big pattern. And I can say that, the studies that I've been doing have been very fruitful, and I'm very thankful for it.
Well, it sounds like you're coming to grips with what true contentment really means. And not just the food on the table and the roof over your head, and that that gives some security about living every day. But true peace at night at 2 a.m, that's a whole different issue, isn't it? It is. Yeah. How can we pray for you? What would be things that you would, one or two things that you would say, I really need the body of Christ to lift me up with this?
A lot of, I think what I've been doing recently is just trying to, with my own family, point them towards God. And this has been a pattern since I became a Christian. My dad, my brother, my grandparents, they're nominally Christian, and I love them dearly. And I have the dad that I have, and I have the brother that I have the family that I have. They've all been given to me by God for a reason. And so I want to do my part to point them towards who Christ is and why he's so important. And I could use a lot of prayer with that. But at the end of the day, just that God would continue to give me clarity as to his will and continue to strengthen me and give me grace to be able to just keep working.
Absolutely. Well, I know the family of FBC well enough, and I know that with that request, they will be doing it. Oh, it's good. Well, thank you very much, Sam, for taking the time to visit with us, and a pleasure to speak with you. And Sam Haney is one of the folks here at Faith Bible Church that he's someone that you should know. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.